Okay, folks, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining. This is a very unusual event. For those of you who have had to sit through vendor-sponsored webinars in the past, you know that typically they're an advertorial for a product followed by a product demo. This is distinctly not that. This is the opposite of a marketing event. We hope you've pulled up to the screen with your equivalent of the 2-martini lunch if you're on the West Coast, or your beer, wine, or cocktail of choice if you're on the East, or your after-dinner cognac in Paris, or as one of our panelists is based in Israel, a nightcap. Wherever you have meeting, airport rules apply here. You're going to get very straight, unfiltered stuff from our panel of CISOs and CSOs. And as a special bonus, for those of you who submitted questions in advance, we're going to send you a DoorDash gift card for $50 so that you can stock your bar for the weekend. A quick word on who's attending, who you are. We've got a pretty remarkable group of attendees today, a lot of senior cybersecurity leaders from organizations ranging from growth tech companies to really major multinationals in healthcare and financial services and pharma and industrial manufacturing concerns, consumer products, media transport, critical infrastructure. So a really remarkable array of attendees, and we're grateful to all of you who've submitted questions. If you have not, please go ahead and do so with the Q&A button that you should see on your panel, and go ahead and submit those questions, and you'll qualify if the panelists answer your questions. Make them challenging, make them interesting. I'm going to start by introducing Jason Trupe, who will moderate the panel here today. He's a career technologist in cybersecurity. He's a former cyber special agent for the FBI, where he was dealing with major cyber breaches and the associated fraud that many of you are fighting off in your organizations. And he spent a career advising companies and orgs of all sizes on their cybersecurity posture. He's also a cybersecurity fellow at the Center for Strategic International Studies in Washington, D.C. So he's shaping policy as well as guiding commercial interests and nonprofits in their cybersecurity initiatives. So Jason's going to be our moderator for today. Aircraft we have in the pattern here. With that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I think it's going to be very exciting. We have speakers on the panel that have decades of experience in cybersecurity. So, you know, our goal is for you to take something back to your organization, some sort of piece of strategy or advice, or even some statistic that you didn't know previously to share that with your colleagues. The topic really for today is how we're securing remote workers and how we're adapting to kind of the recent surge in remote work. As many of you know, that remote work is not necessarily new for many organizations. A lot of new technology companies have been in the steady rise of remote workers for a while now, and we have this kind of new burgeoning gig economy and contractor economy for quite some time. So some companies have been more prepared for this rapid transition to remote work, and some have not. I know for some of my clients that I've talked to them through this process that are having a hard time. So that's the idea. What I'd like to do before I introduce everybody, I'd like to just do a little quick toast, since we all have drinks in our hand, hopefully. My drink of choice is bourbon, and the reason I picked that for my cybersecurity choice of drink is because it's consistent, takes time to perfect, and in the end, it's uncompromising. And so what I'd like to do is just do a quick toast, you know, to toast to the health and safety of all of our families, friends, law enforcement, emergency medical heroes, and our country, and of course the world. So, you know, raise your glass if you're there, and we'll just do a quick toast. And with that, thank you for that. I'd like to introduce, you know, starting with Kevin, if you could just give a little quick background, and then of course, tell us your drink of choice for today.
Sure. My name is Kevin Wilson. I'm the CISO equivalent at Guess Jeans. Been in security now for about 15 years. My drink of choice and how I would approach security would be probably just the simple beer, because it could be as strong as you want, or it could be as weak as you want, and it's readily available all over the globe. So,
Great. Troy?
Thank you, Jason. So Troy Wilkinson here. I'm the global head of cybersecurity data analytics and research in the security operations department at Interpublic Group. We're a Fortune 500 advertising firm with a global footprint. Before that, State Department, and also CISO at a multi-billion-dollar travel company. So it's interesting to see the effect that this is going to have on our hospitality and travel industry going forward. But my drink of choice today is Scotch whiskey, and simply because it's strong but balanced. And so it's just enough bite to be effective, but smooth and balanced on the back end and timeless in its approach.
Thank you, Troy. Omer?
Hi, thank you very much. So I'm Omer Toran. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Cybersecurity. Before that, I worked in companies such as Nest Technologies, CyberArk, and the Israel's National Information Security Agency, where I started experiencing the headaches of running security awareness training. So my drink for today would be a margarita, which is, as long as you have things balanced, you can play with the ingredients. So just like with security, balance is everything.
Great, thanks, Omer. Blake?
Sure. My name is Blake Darche. I'm the co-founder and CSO of Area 1 Security. Prior to that, I worked at CrowdStrike as one of the first incident response consultants there. Worked there for about 2 years. Before that, I worked for the National Security Agency for about 7 years, doing a mix of defensive operations as well as offensive operations, targeting WMD programs worldwide, predominantly chemical and nuclear and missile delivery systems. My drink of choice for security would probably be tequila, because you just never know what you're going to get.
Thank you, Blake. Very appropriate for this call. Let's go ahead and start it out with a question to Omer and Blake. What kind of security incidents are you seeing now with this surge in remote work, or even previously with companies that do remote work? Maybe start with Omer first.
Sure. So when organizations transition to working remotely, a lot of things that are, I'd say, network-based in terms of people's network. Employees at the office, they can interact, they can ask questions, they get an email, they can ask their colleague if it's phishing, if it's for real. And now that everyone's working remotely, they have to make their own decisions. And so you need to support them more. So basically, they're on their own, they're making their own decisions, they're printing materials or whatever it is. They're no longer part of the, I'd say, ecosystem that they had when they were sharing spaces with other employees. So security is it's a bunch of weakest links when you start working remotely, unless you support this in some other way.
And Blake? I think you're muted there, Blake. Okay. Maybe I'll kick this one over to Kevin, if you have an answer to this. What have you been seeing on your end from your security operations?
Well, we've been seeing a lot more uptake in spear phishing, specifically mainly around trying to get credential harvesting going down. A lot of misinformation, or people just searching for information around COVID. So it's a pretty easy dropper for folks to find their way in. So I've seen a few of those popping around the environment.
Yeah, this actually leads to a question I think that Blake would have some insight into. Since the surge of remote work due to the pandemic, have you seen any, I know that Area 1 is tracking, nation state actors and their kind of campaigns. Have you seen any kind of interesting facts that you can share with everybody on the line here?
Yeah, I think on the nation state side, one thing we've noticed is kind of an increase of a Russian attack group trying to do SMB credential harvesting, so pass the hash attacks. There's been a large focus on that. There was an article about this at the San Francisco International Airport where they had taken over the Wi-Fi and they were trying to get Windows users on the Wi-Fi portal to engage remote SMB collection for NTLM and pass the hash credential attacks. We are seeing that attack unfold at other locations as well, and that seems to be a growing focus for that Russian attack group. We're not sure what their end goal is, but it does seem to be an expanding thing that's been going on over the last 30 to 60 days. We're currently aware of multiple websites that are exhibiting that same behavior, and that's just public sites. We're not even sure what other captive portals might be involved there, but there seems to be a large focus on grabbing a lot of credentials by this Russian attack group.
You know, this actually leads us into an interesting question. With the hack at SFO, you know, there's a lot of travelers on the phone here. If you're working with a large multinational or even a national company, you know, we always say as CISOs, you know, have VPNs on your phones and your devices and your laptops when you're working remotely. I'm going to kick this over to Troy. You know, what have you seen and what have you been talking to about, you know, with your board members, your subordinates about, you know, securing individuals now that not only are the traveling individuals, but now everybody's remote. Are you guys doing anything with that?
I think that the world is changing, right? So I can't understate the importance of the remote worker now, which may become the new normal, right? So there's a large percentage, or maybe at least a significant percentage of people who are working from home now that didn't before, that will not be returning to a brick and mortar office. And so as we look at that attack surface that they've moved home, you know, we have a lot of points of attack possibilities. Starbucks, for instance, which we know is, you know, the worst place to go, airport. But now we have home networks, and you have your kids who have to do their schoolwork, and they're on Roblox and YouTube and all these insecure sites. And so you have the potential for compromise at so many locations. And so as we look at protections, how do we get away from the mindset of perimeter and network analysis inside the four walls of the business? You know, it's funny because global transformation and IT transformation has been coming for some time. We keep talking about we're going in a direction. Well, now it's like a wrecking ball has hit us, and we've been fast tracked to that change. So I think that you're going to start seeing a lot more importance put on endpoint detection and response, coupled by cloud detection and response, which is a new segment that focuses on cloud. And so, you know, Palo Alto has a really great segment of tying these things together from a telemetry perspective and really seeing the attack surface everywhere that our workers go, no matter if they're on network, off network, at home, on their PC, their laptop, their iPad. You know, it's about bringing all those data points together so that we can make actionable insights into what we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of talk in the InfoSec community about the perimeter is now the identity, right? It's no longer even the device. It's definitely no longer your perimeter of your network. And I think, you know, this is a really good example of what has happened during this pandemic to show that we need to think of different ways to secure the users. One of the things that I've seen, some mistakes that companies have made, and Troy, I'm going to kick this back to you because I'm really curious about what you guys have done. But there's a couple problems with having a surge of remote workers. One, you don't have enough time to get equipment to those workers. So shipping equipment that's corporate owned is very difficult. And so in some cases, you know, companies are allowing remote access to occur from home devices, whether that's their home laptops, PCs, et cetera. But there's a policy problem, right? Because if you're accessing corporate data from a home device, you may not have all of your security controls and security tools. How have you guys addressed that? And then I'm gonna kick that to Kevin as well.
Absolutely. And so there's a couple of companies that I really want to point out here that are racing to solve this issue, right? And I'm not advocating for one or the other, but I'm talking about a trend in the industry specifically. So if you think about Prisma Access and you think about Zscaler's ZPA product and some of the other companies that are really racing to solve this issue, I think that, you know, we're moving towards being able to protect our employees wherever they go, but also getting those insights. And so, you know, we have we were very fortunate to already have somewhat of a remote workforce before the crisis. So pivoting a large number of our employees home was a challenge, of course, but it was not as much of a challenge as it is to some other companies. And so we're very fortunate in that respect. And I've seen a lot of focus in the last 30 to 60 days on infrastructure. Can our systems support the number of users that we have to through certain VPN technologies or network bandwidth? And that leads me to my actual point, which is split tunneling. What are we going to use security controls from a network perspective via split tunneling, or is it going to be handled at the endpoint? Is it going to be handled at a cloud access broker, or how are we going to look at that? So that answer is different for every single person on this call, I'm sure, but as an industry and as peers, we have to look at that together as a holistic solution on what's the best case scenario, because number one, we're going to use SD-WAN to increase the speed of our employees to the connection they need to be on, but we're going to use these other technologies like cloud, CBR and EDR to make them more secure than we've ever been.
Absolutely. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think a lot of what is being said around, kind of the future of where identity is the perimeter is kind of the approach I've been taking in my own program to really focus us around getting beyond like I guess foresight, I guess is how it thing to where we're at now. Unfortunately, like for, I don't want to speak for the entire retail industry, but in retail, it's a little different to pivot as easily with the number of legacy systems and legacy mindset a lot of the time. So, while these things are great, you have to get even more, I guess, judicious in how you go about executing certain plans when it comes to obviously your space you're working in. So for me, my biggest challenges have been, frankly, just the buy-in of, not furloughing the entire company and moving people to remote work. So that's been one of my personal challenges. So.
Yeah, it seems from the companies that I've talked to, that's the first primary focus, right? The CFOs of these companies are just trying to figure out how to keep employees, which I think is the right approach. Security is, and then it's an IT problem, right? And then it's a security problem. So I get that's really the order of things right now because it has to be. Let's pivot just a little bit. I'm curious. This is to Blake. Have you observed, just either yourself or talking to some of the companies you support, any interesting techniques or automations on the security operations side that have been effective either during this pandemic or even previous to it?
Yeah, I think kind of as was highlighted by Troy, a lot of the orchestrations and automations that have really resulted in a secure architecture for remote workers, right, are endpoint detection, and then IAM protections and IAM detection, right? So securing the identity as the predominant layer into the environment. We've had a fully remote workforce at Area 1 pretty much since our founding, and we're very focused on the IAM side and then on the EDR side, right? With less focus on network traffic monitoring, where you just don't have the network traffic and you need to be able to kind of contain things at that level. So I think those are kind of the areas, along with, good SIEM and SIEM integration, right? So people that have good log aggregation in their log tools.
Yeah, I think just something to consider for those of you who are in management positions on the call here. We talk about this endpoint detection and response and these endpoint management tools. Just remember, I mentioned it earlier, but make sure that your employee handbooks and acceptable use policies are up to date for deploying those tools via consent on non-employee owned equipment. This is something that I've seen as a gap in a lot of companies. This is actually a really good time to revise those policies and actually enact them if you don't have them. And then, so basically you're getting consent to deploy a tool to a employee-owned device that's accessing corporate resources, and be very explicit about what you're accessing and what you're not accessing and the privacy thereof. So just something to consider here. I'd like to shift just a little bit into an area that I think is really important for all organizations. We've spent a lot of time doing training, cybersecurity training. And I do believe that, because of people's travel schedules, not that people aren't working as much, but because you're home, you're remote, you're not, essentially have the time suck of the travel life. We should be spending more time doing training. And I think cybersecurity training should be the top level of training amongst some of the other HR training that's required. So, this is to Omer, what can we do to automate some of the end user cybersecurity training, and how do we adjust it with the current trends or even future trends?
So I think that first, let's talk about the current need. Okay, there's a need for more agility in terms of training, because we need to shift our security training. We need to teach employees what it means to work from home. Okay, if they need to provide access to their kids for Zoom meetings or whatever, or if they bring their own device, we need to teach them new things, and it requires organizations to adjust and change their content quite fast, and it's pretty difficult if you rely on manual processes. So I think that your organizations that have a lot of automation into their security training, they keep this ball rolling as they shift their technologies and adapt for more remote work. So the more they automate their security training, the better they are at handling other tasks. And so, Blake talked about the surge in phishing attacks. And so phishing simulation is something that can be not easily, but can be highly automated to support these kind of situations where you train employees on specific attack scenarios which you think are more important. We should shift the way we provide training. Okay, Troy mentioned the bandwidth of organizations. If you're there launching CBTs and now they cannot just deploy it to the home user because these are different networks. They might not have the proper infrastructure, so they need to shift to more modern kind of training. So the more they automate it, the more they have a solution that automates the training and allows them to focus on the adjustment and not running the operation, the better they are at handling such major changes in their focus as security teams.
Absolutely. I'm actually really curious about this topic. I'd like to hear, there's two questions in this question. Do you have any examples of kind of how you've shifted training in terms of, training people from home about their home routers and kind of home devices? And then the second part of that is I had a conversation just recently about companies wanting to extend that training to family members, because now you have executives that are using, home devices along with their family members at the same time, and even sharing accounts in some cases personally. Have you heard that or come across that, and how are you guys dealing with that?
So first of all, we launched some specific COVID-19 training packages on working remotely right now. We're trying to focus employees on the key factors. You can't teach everyone everything in day one. You need to focus on what matters right now, on working with your device, keeping it secure at home, or the basics, and then you can roll out additional materials. So we added some security content on that part. We provide CISO with some easy to deploy content, simply PowerPoints, with 3 action items for employees. And this is something that has very high acceptance, because employees, as they're focused on the here and now. Everybody's stressed. They don't know if they're keep their position. Nobody knows what the economy will be. And so the training we provide, or security teams provide, need to focus on things that concern employees. Okay, so it's how to work remotely now and how to avoid phishing in light of COVID-19, and not, clean desk policy. right? Which is not relevant right now. So that's one shift. We do see customers approaching us with the need to train employees or employee family members in specific, specific segments, I'd say. But in general, I think that when you talk about, let's say phishing is email, the personal email is an ecosystem which is much broader than the corporate email, right? So employees read their personal emails on the corporate laptop. And so if you provide them training, it extends beyond your corporate security measures, because it extends to their personal and the way they handle their personal stuff. And this, when they work from home remotely, this affects the corporate posture.
Absolutely. I'd like to shift a little bit more to the operational side as well, because I think there's a couple interesting questions that have come about since we've done this. I'm going to kick this over to Kevin. We talk about when an incident occurs. If it happened in a corporate environment, it's, you have your automation and your orchestration if you're a mature organization, or you have your policies and procedures for incident response and your protocols in place. But this changes everything when they're remote. So you might not get access easily to a device, or you might not get access easily to an account. So how have you had to manage and modify your incident response procedures during all of this?
Well, knocking on wood here is like we haven't had any incident level remote issues yet, so please don't attack me. Basically, all I've done is adjust my tool set a little bit to make it easier to remotely quarantine assets. Luckily, I use a pretty solid EDR solution, Cybersecurity, which makes it really easy to go and really remediate at the endpoint level. My biggest concern around incident response, though, is the unknownness of the Office 365 world. So the one closest thing I could call to an incident, since this has happened, would be somebody's personal machine got popped with the personal account, personal Gmail account getting spear phished. But there was a password, grabber within their own personal machine, and they used their credential to log into Office 365 on their personal computer, thus getting their credential harvested. The best way we did it was going and kind of running a cloud-only incident response by deactivating her credential via Office 365, resetting her password, and then basically having me walk her through over the phone how to install malware bytes on her computer to get the malware kicked off. It's not the cleanest way, obviously, because, if this happened on-prem, it would have been easier to solve. But this is the world we live in now. So I hope that's kind of a roundabout way of asking kind of how I've been dealing with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I see this, there's a lot of interesting problems that occur, in this remote environment. And I can see that being one of them. Two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication is a must in this work environment.
Exactly.
So if you don't have that now, definitely get it, and make sure it's not SMS based and it's token based or through an identity provider or some sort of multi-factor identity provider. Those are really, really good things you can do for credential harvesting. I also, I've done investigations in O365 and G Suite, and they're not exactly easy. The logging is very obscure, and you kind of have to search around to kind of find things during an investigation. It's not as intuitive as you would imagine. There are cloud vendors out there that provide services to go through those logs and tease out interesting information like credential harvesting or unusual logins. So that's another area to explore if you use those type of tools. I know we were basically at the end of the time for the panel, but Troy, I want to give you one last moment to speak on that incident response, because I'm really curious to hear from what you guys have been doing on your end. If you can just give us like a 1 or 2 minute response there.
Absolutely, and I think that it's crucial to have not only have a good EDR product like a Cybereason or a Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, but to have total coverage. So many people are lacking. They have it deployed to 80 to 85% of their endpoints, and leaves a gap that could eventually make its way into your environment. Being able to react globally to this threat is crucial and timely, right? So you're seeing these things as they happen at the process level, and being able to isolate machines quickly so that it can't spread is absolutely crucial. And I've seen vendors like Cylance now giving their customers either free or very low cost licenses for home users so that they can protect their wives and kids and things like that. So, if you have a partnership with your AV/EDR, you might have an opportunity to capitalize on that. And then, incident response hasn't changed. I do think I want to point out that there's been a 667% increase in phishing attacks since COVID-19 came about. Wall Street Journal covered that pretty well. No surprise there. These bad guys have nothing else to do either. They're staying in and they're crafting their work. So we have to be ready to, help train our users, train them well, train them differently because it's a different threat, but also keep it fun, exciting, and in small enough chunks that they can understand it and learn from it. So I think this is a huge holistic problem that we're going to have to, have many of these webinars and hours to talk about. One last thing I want to touch on is really, how do you disinfect those machines that come back in? You have an employee leave or you have a layoff. You've got to physically take that asset in. It's been potentially contaminated. You have to use Lysol. So we have a process we're working on to address that issue as well from a physical security standpoint. But that's something, it almost becomes, what's the bigger trade-off, the money of the asset or just letting the person keep it as they exit, so on and so forth. But thank you for allowing me to contribute today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Troy. That's really good insight. And
just real quick for Troy, you don't just use bleach bit, Troy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do everything that the folks on TV say. Just.
I think bleach on a MacBook Pro wouldn't be too bad, but I probably should do that on my keyboard. It's been about 2 years, but anyway, thank you so much. We have a couple questions for the audience for the last few minutes here. I'm going to pick one here from Mimi Royston. So are there any recommendations for location or IP-based protections? Has anybody had any success for geolocation or IP-based protections? I'm going to kick that over to Kevin and Troy if one of you want to answer that.
I would love to take a shot at this real quick. So, as we look at the value of threat intelligence, I cannot understate the value of being able to quickly and efficiently block known bads. So that means your IPs, your domains, your hashes, the things that we can, definitively say have been used in an attack or has some kind of value to blocking. But what we also know on the flip side of that coin is that the bad guys are really good at changing quickly, but also VPNing into countries where they want to be. So they always look like they're coming from the USA. During the 2016 disinformation campaign, the Russians who were posting those Facebook ads were coming from US IP addresses. So Facebook couldn't even geo block them in any way. So it's not effective to think that you're stopping them, but it's certainly effective to kind of get the low hanging fruit.
Absolutely. We have another question here. I'm going to kick this over to Omar or Blake if either you want to answer this. So, we have this remote work scenario. We can't get devices to them quick enough that are corporate owned. And let's say that they might not even have a computer at their house. I mean, this is a very real scenario. Should corporations use, cloud-based solutions in Azure, AWS? And have you guys seen any particular attacks on that infrastructure that you would be concerned with?
I like Amazon Workspaces for this, right? So, with Amazon Workspaces, you can spin up quite a large fleet of virtual systems for users to remotely basically RDP into with a workspace client. And you can really restrict what access they can get to, your own data within that environment. Further, you can have multiple workspace environments. So you can have some people that are more restricted and some people that are less restricted. You can actually block outbound internet access on workspaces to prevent users from siphoning off data. It really can provide kind of a nice enclave, and it's on demand. So you're only paying for when it's running. So if you don't need it next week, you just shut it down. they have an on-demand offering and a always running offering. So I do like workspaces for that. We're in the process of implementing workspaces here to further contain how data is accessed. But it's something to look at, and it's a little bit faster to implement than something like, Citrix or something like that, because it's just on demand.
Great, thanks. Omer, do you have any final comments there?
I totally agree with Blake. I just wanted to add that we should think about end users' mistakes from the perspective of legitimate line of thought. So they might copy things, right, on the desktop, and then with the workspaces, they might copy it to their local machine by accident. So this is also something that you can prevent with workspaces, okay? But you kind of need to plan towards how humans are thinking when they're using machines and create your preventive measures along the line of thought.
Absolutely, and that should also be included in your training regimen, right? And what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and the acceptable use policy for accessing that type of data.
Yeah, totally.
So just in recap, I just want to thank everybody, all the panelists here, just an amazing resume of speakers. Thank everybody for jumping on. Just want to summarize kind of the stuff that we talked about real quickly, and then we'll go ahead and close it out. So, we talked a lot about remote workers, how to protect them. So, adding multi-factor authentication, adding additional training, obviously, adding additional mail filtering for phishing attacks, those sorts of things, making sure that they have devices in place so they can work from, hopefully corporate devices. But when you can't do corporate devices, you might want to think about cloud-based solutions potentially, instead of giving out physical devices to your staff if you can't do it. And then just building that alerting capability from any of the tools that you have that are going to be a little more remote work focused, because probably a lot of your security operations and automation and orchestration has been focused mostly on network and corporate resources. So make sure that you have conversations about kind of shifting that focus over to the amount of remote workers. With that, I just again want to thank everyone for joining today, and hopefully everybody can be safe. I'll kick it over to Mark for any closing comments there.
And Jason, this is Leah. I think Mark's not able to speak right now, but thank you so much for your time today.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate the time, and hopefully we'll do one of these again. Talk to you soon.